Stop scrolling. Stop multitasking. Stop doing whatever you were doing before this moment, because what you're about to read could be the most important thing you encounter this year. Not because it's packed with revolutionary secrets nobody has ever heard of, but because it's going to say out loud what you've been quietly feeling for a long time and haven't had the words for. You are not living your own life. That's a hard sentence to sit with, isn't it? But stay with me, because the moment you truly understand what that means, not just intellectually, but in your gut, in your chest, in that quiet space where honesty lives, everything begins to shift. Right now, today, you are waking up and immediately thinking about what everyone else needs. You're measuring your worth by how useful you are to others. You're making decisions based on who might be disappointed if you don't. You're shaping your days, your choices, your very identity around the approval, expectations, and comfort of people who are not you. And somewhere in the middle of all that giving, all that accommodating, all that people managing, you disappeared. Not dramatically, not all at once. It happened slowly, the way a candle burns down. You were so busy making sure everyone else had light that you didn't notice your own flame getting smaller, and smaller, and smaller. Here's what makes this especially painful. You probably don't even recognize it as a problem, because you've been told your whole life that selflessness is a virtue, that putting others first is noble, that focusing on yourself is selfish. But I need you to hear this clearly, because it might be the most freeing thing anyone has ever said to you. Focusing on yourself is not selfish. It is survival. And today, right now, we're going to talk about how to come back to yourself, how to rebuild the most important relationship you will ever have, the one with you, how to make your focus on yourself not just a passing intention, but a daily, non-negotiable way of living. This isn't a quick fix. It's not a list of morning routine tips or productivity hacks. This is a complete reconstruction from the inside out. And by the time we're done, you won't just feel better. You'll be different. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Quiet Crisis Nobody Talks About. Here's a question I want you to sit with. Really sit with, not just skim past. When was the last time you spent a full day completely focused on what you need? Not what your job demands, not what your family expects, not what social media suggests you should be doing. Just you, your growth, your rest, your vision, your soul. If that question makes you uncomfortable, or if you're drawing a blank trying to remember the last time that happened, you're not alone. You're part of something I call the quiet crisis. It's not the kind of crisis that shows up on the news. Nobody's talking about it in urgent tones. There are no breaking alerts. But it is absolutely devastating millions of people's lives. And there's a very good chance it's been quietly devastating yours. The quiet crisis is this: you have slowly, systematically abandoned yourself, not because you're weak, not because you're broken, but because you were trained to. From the very beginning of your life, you learned a lesson that no one sat you down to teach directly, but that was absorbed through thousands of small moments. Your value is tied to what you do for others. You got praised when you were helpful. You got attention when you performed well. You got affection when you met expectations. You learned deep in your nervous system that love is something you earn by making other people happy. So you became very, very good at it. You learned to read the room. You learned to manage other people's moods. You learned to soften your edges, swallow your needs, adjust your voice, shrink your space, all so that the people around you would stay comfortable. Stay pleased, stay approving, and here's the tragedy. It worked. You became the dependable one, the responsible one, the one everyone could count on. And that felt meaningful. It felt like love. It felt like purpose. But slowly, so slowly you barely noticed, something started to hollow out on the inside. Your own dreams started feeling distant, like memories of a life that belongs to someone else. Your goals became vague. Your sense of who you actually are, separate from your roles and responsibilities, became blurry. Psychologists have a name for what happens when you do this long enough. They call it learned self-erasure, the gradual process by which you become so attuned to the external world that you lose contact with your internal one. You stop knowing what you want. You stop trusting what you feel. You stop believing that what you think matters as much as what everyone else thinks. And that's where real damage begins. Because when you lose contact with yourself, you don't just feel a little lost. You start making decisions from a place of emptiness rather than fullness. You give from a reserve that's never replenished. You show up to every relationship, every obligation, every challenge running on whatever is left after everyone else has taken their share. You think you're being generous. But what you're actually doing is cheating the people you love out of the best version of you. Because the best version of you requires you to be a priority. Here's something I want you to consider. The most impactful people in the world, the ones who genuinely change lives, who create things that matter, who show up fully for the people they love, they all made one decision that most people never make. They decided to be their own first responsibility, not in a cold, closed-off way, not in a way that means ignoring others, but in a way that recognizes a truth so simple it sounds almost obvious once you hear it. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You've heard that phrase before, but have you actually lived it? Have you actually reorganized your life around it? Or has it just been a nice thing to say while you continued running yourself dry? Today, that changes. Chapter 2. What's actually happening in your brain? Let me tell you something about your brain that might change how you see all of this. Your brain is not designed to constantly focus outward. It sounds like a strange thing to say in a culture that rewards constant output, constant availability, constant responsiveness. But yeah, it's a biological fact, and ignoring it has real consequences. Here's what I mean. Inside your brain, there's a network of regions that neuroscientists call the default mode network. This network activates during quiet moments, when you're not reacting to an email, not managing someone else's feelings, not performing for an audience. It's the part of your brain that hums with activity when you're taking a long walk or sitting quietly before the world wakes up or just being without an agenda. This network isn't idle. It's doing some of the most important work your brain ever does. It's processing your experiences, consolidating your memories, building your sense of self, and planning for your future. It's your brain's way of checking in with you, who you are, what matters to you, where you're headed. When you chronically deprive yourself of that inward space, when you fill every single moment with external demands, other people's needs, endless notifications and obligations, you don't just feel tired. You literally suppress this network. You rob your brain of the processing time it needs to keep you whole. And the effects are real, and they're measurable. Researchers call it continuous partial attention, a state where you're never quite fully present, never quite fully yourself. You're always slightly behind, slightly scattered, slightly disconnected from your own inner life. You start absorbing other people's moods and anxieties like a sponge because your brain has lost its ability to distinguish between their emotional state and yours. This is not a metaphor. This is neuroscience. Studies consistently show that people who regularly engage in inward-focused practices, reflection, quiet time, journaling, meditation, even just intentional solitude, show measurably increased activity in the prefrontal cortex. That's the part of your brain responsible for clear decision-making, self-regulation, and the ability to think beyond the immediate moment. They also show decreased reactivity in the amygdala, your brain's threat detection center. In plain terms, they're less anxious, less reactive, more grounded. On the other side of that equation, people who chronically neglect inward focus show the opposite pattern. Their prefrontal cortex becomes less active, meaning they struggle more with impulsive decisions, emotional regulation, and long-term thinking. Their amygdala becomes hyperreactive, meaning everyday stress feels like genuine danger. They literally rewire their brains for external dependency. Every day that you prioritize everyone else over yourself, you are training your brain to need external direction, external validation, external energy to function. You are building a nervous system that cannot generate its own stability. But, and this is the part that should genuinely excite you, neuroplasticity means this process is reversible. Your brain can rewire itself. It is doing it constantly in response to what you practice. Research shows that as little as 20 minutes of daily self-focused attention can begin to change these patterns. Not in weeks or months. The shifts start almost immediately at the neurological level, even if you don't consciously feel them right away. Your default mode network begins to activate more readily. Your prefrontal cortex strengthens. Your amygdala quiets down. You start thinking more clearly. You start feeling more stable. You start making decisions from a place of inner knowing rather than anxious reaction. This isn't self-help language. This is biology. When you focus on yourself consistently, when you make your own growth, your own inner life, your own well-being a genuine daily priority, you don't just feel better. You literally become more intelligent, more creative, more emotionally capable. Your brain operates at a higher level because it is no longer constantly overwhelmed by the demands you've placed on it. And here's what that means for your life practically. You stop making decisions you regret. You stop agreeing to things that drain you. You stop saying yes when your entire body is screaming no. You start showing up to everything, your work, your relationships, your challenges, as a more complete, more capable, more fully present version of yourself. The science is not ambiguous on this. Self-focus is not a luxury for people who have extra time. It is a biological necessity for anyone who wants to live and contribute at a high level. You were not built to run on empty. Your brain requires inward attention the same way your body requires sleep. And just like sleep deprivation gradually impairs every function you have, chronic self-neglect gradually impairs everything you bring to the world. So the first step, before any habit, any strategy, any system, is simply understanding this. Focusing on yourself every single day is not optional. It is essential. And it is the foundation on which everything else in this conversation will be built. Chapter 3. The Approval Trap. that's quietly running your life. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. When you post something online, do you check back to see how people responded? When you make a decision, a real one, something that matters, do you find yourself running it by someone else before you feel okay about it? When someone criticizes you, even someone whose opinion shouldn't matter much, does it stick with you longer than it should? If you answered yes to any of those, I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to tell you that you are living inside one of the most sophisticated psychological traps ever built. And the trap wasn't built by someone else. It was built by your own brain, piece by piece, over years of conditioning. It's called approval dependency, and it is silently running more of your life than you probably realize. Here's how it works at the neurological level, because I think understanding the mechanics of this is what actually gives you power over it. Every time you receive external validation, a compliment, a like, an approving nod, someone saying, "Great job," your brain releases dopamine, the same neurotransmitter that's involved in every addictive behavior known to science. Your brain registers that moment of approval as a reward, and it immediately begins building a pattern. Seek more of this. At first, it feels like motivation, like you're doing well and people are noticing. But over time, something insidious happens. The more you rely on external validation to feel okay about yourself, the weaker your internal validation system becomes. Think of it like a muscle you never use. It atrophies, it shrinks, and eventually you genuinely lose the ability to feel confident, capable, or worthy without someone else confirming it for you. You stop being able to say, "I did a good job," without needing someone else to say it first. You stop being able to make a decision without needing someone to tell you it's the right one. You stop even knowing what you want without checking what everyone else thinks you should want. That is not a small thing. That is the slow disappearance of your own authority over your own life. And here's the part that really needs to land. The people whose approval you're seeking are not qualified to set the ceiling on your life. This isn't a criticism of the people you love. It's simply human psychology. People are naturally, unconsciously, made uncomfortable by others who outgrow them, who achieve more, who become different than they used to be. Not out of malice, but out of the deep human instinct that says, if you change, what does that mean about me? So when you constantly seek the approval of the people around you, you are, without realizing it, giving them veto power over how far you're allowed to go. You're asking for permission to grow, and very often the permission they give you keeps you safely within the boundaries of what makes them comfortable. Your family wants you to do well, but not so differently that they can't recognize you anymore. Your friends want you to succeed, but not so much that they feel left behind. Your colleagues want you to do good work, but not so brilliantly that it makes them feel inadequate. None of this is their fault. It's simply the nature of social ecosystems when approval seeking is in play. The only way out of this trap is to rebuild what I call your internal compass, your own reliable sense of what's true, what's right, and what's worth pursuing, independent of what anyone else thinks about it. This doesn't mean you stop caring about people. It doesn't mean you become arrogant or closed off to feedback. It means you become selective. You learn to distinguish between the voice of someone who genuinely wants to see you become your best self and the voice of someone who, consciously or not, wants you to stay manageable. When you build that internal compass, when you start measuring your progress by your own standards, your growth by your own metrics, your worth by your own assessment, something remarkable happens. You stop making decisions based on fear of judgment. You stop shrinking to fit other people's comfort zones. You stop playing smaller than you are because it feels safer. You start pursuing what you actually want. And that changes everything. Chapter 4. The daily practice that rebuilds who you are. Here's a truth that doesn't get said enough in personal development conversations. Most people go through their entire lives without ever truly knowing themselves. Not in a surface way. They know their name, their job title, their preferences in coffee and movies. But at the level that actually matters, what truly drives them, what genuinely lights them up, what they actually value versus what they've been taught to value, most people are strangers to themselves. And you cannot build a meaningful life based on who you are if you don't know who that is. This is why I want to walk you through what I call the daily self-return practice. Not a journaling exercise, not a productivity routine, but a systematic daily process for coming back to yourself over and over until self-knowledge becomes the foundation everything else is built on. There are 5 layers to this practice, and they work together to create something that goes far beyond self-reflection. They create self-authorship, the experience of being the one writing your own story rather than reacting to the one being written around you. The first layer is the morning anchor. Before your phone, before the news, before the first email or message or request from the outside world, you spend 5 minutes answering 3 questions, not typing them, not rushing through them, actually sitting with them. Who am I choosing to be today? What matters most to me right now? What is one thing I will do today that is purely for my own growth? These questions sound simple, but their power is in the repetition, because most people wake up and immediately become whoever yesterday made them. They slip into autopilot, the same patterns, the same reactions, the same identity, without ever consciously choosing it. The morning anchor interrupts that autopilot. It forces you to decide who you are each day, rather than drifting into it. And over time, those daily decisions stack up into something profound, a deliberate identity, consciously shaped, rather than an accidental one inherited from circumstance. The second layer is the midday check-in. Somewhere in the middle of your day, lunch, a bathroom break, a moment between tasks, you pause for 60 seconds and ask yourself one question. Am I still being the person I chose to be this morning, or have I drifted? This isn't about self-criticism. It's about awareness. It's about catching the drift early, before you've spent an entire day being a version of yourself that doesn't actually serve you, and gently redirecting. Most people wait until they're exhausted and frustrated at the end of the day to realize they've been off track. The midday check-in gives you a course correction opportunity while there's still day left to use. The third layer is the evening integration. At the end of each day, before you sleep, you spend 10 minutes reviewing not what you did, but who you were. Not, did I finish my task list? But, did I act in alignment with what I care about? Not, was I productive? But, was I honest with myself today? You're looking for patterns. What situations pulled you away from yourself? What moments felt most genuinely you? What triggered you? And what does that tell you about something that still needs attention? You are treating yourself like the most important subject you will ever study, because you are. The fourth layer is the weekly identity review. Once a week, you look at the data from your daily practice and ask a bigger question: is the person I've been this week someone I'm proud of? What pattern am I ready to change? What aspect of myself needs more attention or development? This is where you consciously evolve your identity rather than letting it drift. Most people change accidentally. They become whoever their environment shapes them into. The weekly identity review means you change by design. You choose who you're becoming rather than discovering it after the fact. The fifth layer is the monthly authenticity audit. Once a month, you zoom all the way out and ask the deepest questions. Am I living according to my own values or values I inherited from someone else? Are my goals actually mine, or do they belong to an expectation I absorbed? Am I in relationships that allow me to be fully myself, or do they require me to perform a version of myself that isn't real? These questions are often uncomfortable. They might reveal that a career you've been pursuing doesn't actually resonate with who you are, that a relationship requires you to suppress parts of yourself, that you've been chasing a version of success that doesn't actually excite you when you get honest about it. But discomfort is not a reason to avoid these questions. It's actually the signal that they're the right ones. You cannot build a life that fits you if you don't know the shape of who you are. The daily self-return practice is how you learn that shape intimately, accurately, and on an ongoing basis. When you commit to this, something shifts that's hard to describe until you experience it. You stop feeling like a stranger in your own life. You start making decisions that feel right rather than just acceptable. You stop drifting toward whoever your circumstances want to make you, and you start becoming who you actually are. That is not a small thing. That is the foundation of everything. Chapter 5. Breaking Out of the People-Pleasing Cage. I want to say something that might sting a little, so I'm going to say it with as much care as I can. People-pleasing is not kindness. It looks like kindness. It feels like kindness. But underneath the surface, it is something much more complicated and much more self-destructive. Every time you say yes when you mean no, you are not being kind. You are teaching yourself that your own boundaries don't matter. Every time you swallow your honest opinion to keep someone comfortable, you are not being considerate. You are practicing self-erasure. Every time you rearrange your priorities around someone else's needs because you're afraid of their disappointment, you're not being generous. You are slowly, consistently, deliberately making yourself smaller. And the cruelest irony of all, people-pleasing doesn't even actually please people, not in any real lasting way. When you spend your life accommodating others, when you never push back, never express a genuine preference, never show up as a full and honest version of yourself, you don't give people the gift of a real relationship with you. You give them a performance, a carefully managed, perpetually agreeable performance that has very little to do with who you actually are. And then you feel lonely in those relationships because how could you not? The person they're relating to isn't entirely you. So where does this come from? Why do so many genuinely intelligent, capable, caring people get trapped in this pattern? The roots almost always trace back to early experiences. Maybe you grew up in an environment where keeping the peace was the highest priority. Maybe you learned that expressing a need led to tension, or that disagreeing made people pull away. Maybe you discovered early that being agreeable meant being loved, and being difficult meant being alone. Whatever the specific story, the lesson was the same. Make yourself manageable, and you'll be safe. That lesson made sense then. In the context of childhood, where you were genuinely dependent on the people around you, accommodating them was survival. But you are not a child anymore, and what was once a survival strategy has become a cage. The behaviors that kept you safe when you were young are now preventing you from becoming who you need to be as an adult. The same patterns that earned you approval at 10 are costing you your potential at 30, 40, 50. Here is the truth about people-pleasing and achievement that nobody says clearly enough. You cannot accommodate your way to a meaningful life. Every significant thing you will ever build, every breakthrough you will ever have, every version of yourself you will ever grow into, it will require you to disappoint someone, to say no to something that would have made someone else happy, to choose your own direction over someone else's expectations for you. The most extraordinary people in every field share this quality. They were willing to be misunderstood. They were willing to choose their vision over other people's comfort. They were willing to disappoint, not carelessly, not cruelly, but deliberately, in service of something they believed in. And that willingness? That came from one thing. They stopped needing everyone's approval to feel okay about themselves. So how do you break free? First, you recognize that you are not responsible for other people's emotions. You can be thoughtful. You can be kind. You can be considerate of how your choices affect others. But their emotional response to your authentic choices is theirs to manage, not yours to prevent. Other people's discomfort is not an emergency that requires you to dissolve yourself. Second, you learn the difference between consideration and sacrifice. Consideration means being aware of others and choosing, when possible, to be kind and respectful. Sacrifice means giving up your own truth, your own needs, your own growth, not as a conscious, generous choice, but as a fearful, automatic response to the threat of disapproval. One builds relationships. The other erodes you. Third, you start building tolerance for discomfort. This is a skill like any other, and like any skill, it develops through practice. Start small. Express a preference that might not match someone else's. Decline an invitation without a long justification. Share an honest opinion in a low-stakes conversation. Each time you survive the discomfort, and you will survive it, you build evidence that disapproval is not dangerous, that the world does not end when someone is momentarily disappointed by you, that you are capable of being yourself even when it's uncomfortable. Fourth, you become highly intentional about your social environment, because you cannot break free from people-pleasing if you remain surrounded only by people who reward the performance and punish the authenticity. This doesn't mean abandoning everyone, but it does mean investing more in relationships where you can show up honestly, and less in relationships that only work when you're suppressing yourself. The life waiting for you on the other side of people-pleasing is not a life of selfishness or isolation. It is a life of genuine connection with people who actually know you, actually see you, actually appreciate the real version of who you are. It is a life where your decisions come from your own values rather than your fear of someone else's reaction. It is a life where you can wake up in the morning and recognize yourself. That life is worth the discomfort of getting there. Chapter 6. Building a wall around your self-worth. Here's something I want you to imagine for a moment. Picture your sense of self-worth as a house. The house where you live, your confidence, your sense of value, your belief in your own capabilities. Now picture that house built entirely out of other people's opinions. Every compliment is a brick. Every criticism removes one. Every approving glance adds mortar. Every sideways look or passive-aggressive comment takes a chunk out of the wall. The house is constantly under construction, constantly under threat, never finished, never stable, because the building materials are always changing, always outside your control, always dependent on what other people feel like giving you today. That is exactly how most people are living. Their sense of worth rises and falls with every interaction. They feel good about themselves when someone praises them and genuinely shaken when someone criticizes them. They are, without realizing it, living in a house that can be demolished by a single bad conversation. And here's the exhausting part. When your self-worth is built from external materials, you have to constantly maintain it. You have to keep performing, keep accommodating, keep being impressive enough or agreeable enough or visible enough to keep getting the building materials coming in. The moment you stop, the house starts to crumble. This is why so many high-achieving, outwardly successful people feel secretly fragile. They've built impressive-looking houses out of the most unstable materials imaginable. What I want to talk about now is how to build something different. Something with a foundation that doesn't shift when the weather changes. Something sturdy enough that criticism becomes interesting information rather than a structural threat. I call it internal validation architecture. And it starts with one fundamental shift in how you measure your own worth. The first thing you need is your own scorecard. Right now, you're almost certainly measuring yourself with someone else's measuring stick. You feel successful when others acknowledge you. You feel valuable when others express appreciation. You feel capable when others give you confirmation. But here's the problem with that scorecard. You didn't design it, you don't control it, and it has almost nothing to do with your actual reality. Other people's assessments of you are filtered through their own insecurities, their own limited information, their own emotional state on any given day. Using their scorecard to determine your worth is like letting a stranger who's never seen your home give it a rating, and then redecorating based on their review. Your internal scorecard is different. It's based entirely on metrics you control. Did I act in alignment with what I value today? Did I show up honestly, even when it was uncomfortable? Did I make progress, even small progress, towards something that genuinely matters to me? Did I treat myself with the same basic respect I'd extend to someone I care about? These are the questions that determine your real worth, not whether someone noticed, not whether someone approved, not whether your performance received the reaction you hoped for. When you shift from the external scorecard to the internal one, something remarkable happens. You stop being at the mercy of everyone else's mood. You develop a stable, grounded sense of your own value that persists regardless of what's happening around you. The second thing you need is self-compassion. Real self-compassion, not the watered-down version. Here's something that surprises people. One of the main reasons they are so desperate for external validation is that they are absolutely brutal to themselves internally. The internal monologue running in most people's heads is not kind. It's critical, harsh, relentless. Every mistake gets cataloged. Every shortcoming gets amplified. Every failure gets used as evidence for a verdict that was probably already decided. I'm not enough. When you live under that kind of internal criticism, you become desperately hungry for external praise. Because external praise is the only relief from the constant self-attack. You need someone else to say you're good enough because you're incapable of saying it to yourself. Real self-compassion breaks this cycle, and it has three specific components. The first is self-kindness, speaking to yourself the way you would speak to a close friend who's struggling with the same thing you're struggling with. Not toxic positivity, not pretending everything is fine, but genuine, warm, human kindness directed inward. The second is shared humanity, recognizing that whatever you're going through, whatever mistakes you've made, whatever ways you've fallen short of who you want to be, you are not uniquely, catastrophically flawed. You are human. This is what humans do. Struggle, fail, learn, try again. That's not shameful. That's the actual process. The third is mindful awareness, observing your own thoughts and feelings without being completely consumed by them. You can notice the self-critical voice without believing everything it says. You can feel disappointed in yourself without making that disappointment your entire identity. When you develop genuine self-compassion, you need external validation less. Not because you've stopped caring about others, but because you've stopped torturing yourself, and therefore stopped desperately needing external rescue from that torture. The third thing you need is an evidence file, not for anyone else, just for you. A documented, specific, real record of your capabilities, your growth, your courage, and your progress. Not a brag list, not an ego archive, a simple, honest collection of proof that you are more capable, more resilient, and more worthy than your doubt tells you when it gets loud. Include challenges you've navigated, skills you've developed, times you've shown up when it was hard, moments where you helped someone in a way that mattered, evidence of growth, the gap between who you were a year ago and who you are now. When doubt creeps in, and it will, you don't have to argue with it abstractly. You have evidence, concrete, specific, undeniable evidence of who you actually are. Separate from whatever any critic, internal or external, wants to say about you. The fourth thing you need is selective receptivity. This is not about dismissing all feedback or pretending that other people's perspectives are irrelevant. It's about becoming intentional, even strategic, about whose voice you allow to influence your self-perception. Before you let someone's opinion affect how you feel about yourself, ask three things. Does this person have genuine expertise or experience relevant to what they're commenting on? Is what they're saying specific and actionable? Or is it vague and character-based? Is this person invested in my growth, or does my growth make them uncomfortable? Feedback that passes all three tests is worth integrating. Feedback that fails them is worth acknowledging politely and then releasing, because holding on to it doesn't make you humble. It makes you hostage. When your internal validation system is strong, criticism stops being a demolition event and starts being just information, some of it useful, some of it irrelevant, none of it capable of collapsing your sense of who you are. That is the house you want to build, solid foundation, walls you constructed yourself, no external demolition crew with access to the load-bearing walls. Build it deliberately, build it daily, and watch how differently the world looks when you're standing on stable ground. Chapter 7. Protecting your energy, like it's the most valuable thing you have, because it is. Your energy, your mental clarity, your emotional capacity, your creative vitality, your physical aliveness is the currency with which you build everything that matters to you. Every goal you pursue, every relationship you invest in, every version of yourself you're growing into requires energy. And right now, there's a very good chance that your energy is being steadily drained by sources you haven't fully accounted for. I'm not talking about hard work. Hard work that aligns with your values and moves you toward your goals actually generates energy over time. I'm talking about something different. The subtle, constant, low-grade drain that comes from spending your energy in places and on people that take without giving back. You know the feeling. You leave certain conversations feeling lighter, clearer, more motivated, and you leave others feeling like something has been taken from you, a flatness, a heaviness, a vague depletion that you can't quite name, but that's unmistakably real. That second category deserves your serious attention. Step 1 is simply awareness, which sounds obvious until you realize how many people have never actually mapped their energy landscape. They move through their days reacting to whoever and whatever shows up, never pausing to notice the pattern. So here is a practice for 1 week after every significant interaction, a phone call, a meeting, a social gathering, a conversation with a family member. Pause for 30 seconds and notice. Do I feel more energized or more depleted? Not to judge the person, not to make dramatic decisions, just to gather data. Because data is power, and most people are making their energy investments completely blind. After 1 week of honest tracking, patterns will emerge. You'll notice that certain people consistently leave you feeling expanded, more alive, more motivated, more like yourself. And others consistently leave you feeling contracted, smaller, heavier, drained. That information is not something to ignore. Step 2 is building what I call an energy boundary system, not walls to keep people out, but filters that protect your internal resources from being constantly depleted without your conscious consent. Energy boundaries take several forms. Time boundaries mean being honest about how much time you can genuinely give to draining interactions without it costing you the resources you need for your own growth. Topic boundaries mean recognizing that you do not have to engage with every conversation that gets brought to you, especially the ones that are simply loops of complaint with no movement toward resolution. Emotional boundaries mean understanding the difference between genuinely supporting someone you care about and absorbing someone else's chaos into your own nervous system as if it were yours to carry. Digital boundaries might be the most underestimated of all. The constant accessibility that modern technology demands, the expectation that you should be reachable, responsive, available at all times, is one of the most significant energy drains in contemporary life. And it is one you have far more control over than you probably exercise. Step 3 is what I call the mental separation practice. This is specifically for situations where you're with someone who is in genuine emotional turmoil, someone you care about, whose pain is real, but whose chaos you cannot afford to absorb completely. Before entering that interaction, you remind yourself of something simple. Their storm is their storm. I can stand beside them in it without being swept away by it. During the interaction, you practice what psychologists call emotional differentiation, the ability to be genuinely present with someone's feelings without making those feelings your own. You can hear their pain without adopting it. You can offer support without surrendering your stability. You can care deeply without losing yourself. This is not coldness. This is sustainability. And ultimately, it makes you a far better source of support because you're showing up as a grounded presence rather than just another person drowning alongside them. Step 4 is strategic protection of your time and attention. This simply means being intentional about being unavailable sometimes. Not rude, not distant, just protected. There are hours in your day that belong to your growth, to your rest, to the activities and practices and relationships that replenish rather than drain you. Those hours deserve to be guarded with the same seriousness you'd bring to any other non-negotiable commitment. Because here's what happens when you don't protect them. They get filled by default, by whoever asks loudest, by whatever shows up. And then you look up at the end of the week and wonder why you feel like you've been running constantly, but somehow standing still. Step 5, and this one matters enormously, is active replenishment. Protection is only half the equation. The other half is deliberately, intentionally filling yourself back up. What gives you energy, not what you think should give you energy. What actually does. For some people, it's physical movement, a run, a long walk, a workout that reminds them they're in a body that is alive and capable. For others, it's creative work, writing, building, making something with their hands. For others, it's genuine solitude, not lonely isolation, but the rich, restorative quiet of being alone with your own thoughts. The key is not to treat replenishment as a reward for when you've finished everything else, because you will never finish everything else. There will always be more. Replenishment has to be scheduled, protected, and treated as a non-negotiable investment in your capacity to function. Your energy is not an infinite resource. It is finite, precious, and, if managed well, renewable. Manage it like it matters, because everything you're trying to build depends on it. Chapter 8. Rebuilding your body and mind as one system. Something important needs to be said here because personal development conversations often separate the physical from the mental as if they're two different projects running in parallel. They're not. Your body and your mind are one integrated system. What happens in one directly and immediately affects the other. And if you're trying to rebuild yourself, truly rebuild, not just rearrange your thinking while neglecting your physical foundation, you need to work on both simultaneously, because each one is the scaffolding for the other. Let's talk about what that actually means in practical terms. On the physical side, it starts with understanding that your body is constantly reconstructing itself. The cells you're made of today are not the same cells you were made of a year ago. This is not a metaphor. It's biology. Your body is literally rebuilding itself all the time, and the quality of that reconstruction depends directly on the inputs you give it. Food is the most fundamental input. And I want to be careful here not to turn this into a diet conversation, because that's not what this is about. This is about something simpler and more profound. Food is information. Every meal you eat sends signals to your cells about how to function, not just your muscles and organs, your brain, your mood, your cognitive clarity, your emotional resilience. When you consistently fuel yourself with processed, nutrient-depleted food, you're not just affecting your waistline. You're affecting your ability to think clearly, to regulate your emotions, to sustain focus, to recover from stress. You are quite literally feeding or starving the biological hardware that runs your entire life. This doesn't require perfection or obsession. It requires intention. The simple shift from eating reactively, grabbing whatever is convenient, using food primarily as emotional regulation, to eating thoughtfully as an act of respect for the system that carries you through your days changes more than you'd expect. Movement is next. And again, this is not about athletic achievement. This is about something your body is actually designed for and suffers without. Regular physical movement, cardiovascular work that gets your heart rate up, strength work that challenges your muscles, and the simple, underrated practice of walking does things to your brain that no supplement or strategy can replicate. It increases blood flow to your prefrontal cortex. It stimulates the production of proteins that literally grow new brain cells. It regulates mood, reduces anxiety, and improves the quality of sleep in ways that compound over time. Strength training specifically deserves a mention here, because its mental benefits are as significant as its physical ones. When you regularly put yourself in situations where something is hard and you do it anyway, when you push against resistance and come out the other side, you build not just muscle, but a particular kind of psychological confidence, the lived, embodied knowledge that you can handle difficulty. That discomfort is not a stop sign, that you are more capable than the part of you that wants to quit. That knowledge transfers. It shows up in how you approach challenges at work, in relationships, in every area of life where you need the courage to push through something difficult. Sleep is the third pillar, and it is wildly undervalued in a culture that treats exhaustion as a badge of honor. During sleep, your brain does something called glymphatic clearance. It essentially washes itself, removing the metabolic waste products that build up during waking hours. It consolidates memories, processes emotions, and repairs the neural connections that support clear thinking. Without adequate quality sleep, every cognitive and emotional function you have is compromised. This isn't about sleeping more hours for the sake of it. It's about understanding that sleep is not rest from your life. It is the foundation of your life. The decisions you make, the emotional regulation you practice, the focus you bring to your growth, all of it is built on the quality of your sleep. On the mental side, reconstruction starts with what I call cognitive hygiene. Being as intentional about what you put into your mind as you are about what you put into your body. Your brain is processing information constantly. The quality of what it processes shapes the quality of how it thinks. When you spend hours consuming content that promotes anxiety, outrage, comparison, or passive entertainment with no nutritional value, you are not just wasting time. You are actively feeding patterns of thinking that work against everything you're trying to build. Cognitive hygiene means curating your inputs. It means being selective about what news you consume, what social media you scroll through, what conversations you participate in, what voices you allow to occupy space in your head, not out of avoidance, but out of respect for the quality of mind you're trying to develop. Mental training is the companion practice. Just as your body gets stronger through consistent physical challenge, your mind gets stronger through consistent cognitive challenge. Meditation, not as a spiritual practice necessarily, though it can be that too, but as a training modality for the single most important mental skill, the ability to direct and sustain your own attention. In a world designed to fragment your focus, the capacity to hold your own attention deliberately is an enormous advantage. Reading, specifically reading material that challenges you, expands your thinking, introduces you to ideas and perspectives you wouldn't have encountered otherwise. Not for entertainment, though that has its place, but as a practice of deliberate cognitive expansion. Learning new skills, engaging in work that requires genuine effort and problem solving, anything that takes your mind out of its comfortable automatic grooves and forces it to build new pathways. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, your beliefs. Your belief system is the operating system your mind runs on. It determines what you think is possible, what you think you deserve, what you think is worth attempting. Limiting beliefs don't just make you feel bad, they constrain your actual behavior in concrete, measurable ways. They determine which opportunities you pursue and which you dismiss before you've even considered them. Rebuilding your belief system is not about affirmations or wishful thinking. It's about honest examination. Finding the specific beliefs that are shaping your life. I'm not the kind of person who people like me don't. It's too late for me to, and subjecting them to the same scrutiny you'd apply to any other claim about reality. Are they true? Actually, provably true? Or are they stories that got installed early and have been running unchallenged ever since? When you rebuild your body and your mind together, when you treat the whole integrated system with the intention and respect it deserves, you don't just feel better, you become genuinely more capable. You think more clearly, feel more stable, act more aligned, and sustain higher performance across every area of your life. That is not an accident. That is what happens when you take your own reconstruction seriously. Chapter 9. The Enemy Living Inside You. Let me tell you about the most sophisticated saboteur you will ever encounter. It doesn't live outside of you. It's not your boss, your family, your circumstances, or your past. It doesn't have a face you can confront or an argument you can win. It operates below the surface of your conscious awareness, and it is extraordinarily good at what it does. What it does is this. Every single time you get serious about changing, it shows up. Every time you commit to becoming a better version of yourself, it quietly begins working against you. Every time you start gaining real momentum, it finds a way to slow you down, trip you up, or convince you to stop. This is not a metaphor. This is a real psychological process. And it has a name. It's called internal resistance. And understanding it is the difference between people who transform their lives and people who spend years making the same resolutions and arriving at the same place. Here's what you need to understand first. Internal resistance is not your enemy in the way you might think. It is not malicious. It is not trying to destroy you. It is, in its own misguided way, trying to protect you. Your subconscious mind has one overriding priority: keep you safe. And its definition of safe is familiar, known, predictable, whatever you've already survived, even if it's painful, even if it's limiting, even if it's slowly killing your potential. Your subconscious knows you've survived it, and survival is its highest value. Growth, on the other hand, is the unknown, and to the part of your brain responsible for your protection, the unknown is inherently threatening. It doesn't matter that you consciously want to change. It doesn't matter that your logical mind knows the change would be good for you. The protective subconscious part of your brain doesn't speak in logic. It speaks in feelings, and the feeling it generates when you approach real change is, at a subtle, persistent level, danger. This is why change is hard even when you desperately want it. This is why you procrastinate on the exact activities that would most improve your life. This is why you find yourself inexplicably tired when you try to work on something meaningful, or suddenly craving distraction right when you are building real momentum. You're not weak. You're not lacking willpower. You're experiencing a biological protection response that was designed for a very different kind of threat than the one you're actually navigating. Once you understand that, you can stop fighting yourself and start working with your own psychology. The first form resistance takes is comfort zone gravity. This is the constant low-grade pull back toward familiar patterns, even when those patterns are no longer serving you. You decide to wake up an hour earlier to invest in your own growth. For 3 days, it goes well. By day 5, the alarm goes off and something in you that feels almost physical pulls you back under the covers, not because you're lazy, because your nervous system has an established pattern, and deviating from that pattern triggers a quiet alarm that says, "This is not normal. Return to normal." The way through comfort zone gravity is not willpower. Willpower is finite and exhausting, and relying on it is how people burn out in the first 2 weeks of every ambitious intention. The way through is consistency over intensity. Small actions, repeated reliably, that gradually shift what your nervous system considers normal. You don't blast through the comfort zone. You expand it, steadily, patiently, deliberately, until the new behavior is the familiar one. The second form resistance takes is identity protection. This one is subtler and in some ways more dangerous. Your subconscious has a very clear picture of who you are, and it will work to maintain that picture, not because the picture is accurate or flattering, but because it's established. Certainty, even uncomfortable certainty, feels safer to your subconscious than the uncertainty of becoming someone new. So when you start making real progress, when you're actually becoming more disciplined, more capable, more aligned with who you want to be, something strange often happens. You sabotage yourself, not consciously, but you find yourself doing something that undoes the progress, making a choice that contradicts the new identity, behaving in a way that confirms the old one. This is not a character flaw. This is your subconscious trying to reconcile what's happening with what it believes to be true about you. The solution is identity evidence. Every time you act in alignment with who you want to become, you provide your subconscious with new data that gradually updates its picture of you, not through declarations or affirmations, but through actual behavior. You don't tell yourself you're disciplined. You do the disciplined thing again and again until your subconscious has accumulated enough evidence to update the file. The third form is perfectionism paralysis. And I want to spend a moment here because this one is particularly good at disguising itself as something reasonable. Perfectionism feels like high standards. It presents itself as the voice of quality, of excellence, of not wanting to do things halfway. But in practice, it is most often a fear response wearing a very convincing costume. What perfectionism actually does is give you a permanent excuse not to start. If the standard is perfection, if you can't begin until conditions are ideal, until you know enough, until you're certain it will work, then you will never begin. Because conditions are never ideal. You never know enough at the start. Certainty never arrives before action. It only arrives through it. The antidote is what I call deliberate imperfection, the practice of taking the first step before you feel ready. Writing the imperfect first draft. Starting the conversation before you have the perfect words. Beginning the project before you have the perfect plan. Progress is the goal, not perfection, and done honestly and earnestly is infinitely more valuable than perfect but theoretical. The fourth form is catastrophic forecasting. Your mind's tendency to generate detailed, convincing disaster scenarios about everything that could go wrong if you take the risk you're considering. You want to change careers, but your mind immediately produces a vivid montage of financial ruin and professional humiliation. You want to have an honest conversation with someone important to you, but your mind convinces you in advance that it will destroy the relationship. You want to pursue something that genuinely excites you, but your mind reminds you of every similar attempt that has ever failed. The mind does this not to be cruel, but because anticipating threats is one of its primary functions. The problem is that it applies this threat detection to psychological risks as if they were physical ones, as if the fear of judgment or the discomfort of failure were genuine dangers rather than merely uncomfortable feelings. The practice here is honest risk assessment combined with something that sounds counterintuitive, deliberately imagining the worst-case scenario, clearly and specifically. Not to catastrophize, but to find out whether the actual worst case is as devastating as the vague, ambient dread makes it feel. Almost always it isn't. Almost always, when you look directly at the actual worst that could happen, you discover that you could handle it, that you would survive it, and that the regret of not trying would ultimately be harder to live with than any outcome the attempt could produce. The fifth form is energy depletion resistance, the sudden, inexplicable fatigue that appears specifically when you're about to do something that matters. You have energy for everything except the thing you most need to do. Your inbox, your social media, the random tasks that have been on your list for weeks, these suddenly feel urgent and manageable the moment you sit down to work on your actual priorities. This is not coincidence. Your brain is an energy conservation machine, and effortful, meaningful work requires more energy than mindless reactivity. So resistance generates fatigue as a deterrent. The way through this is momentum through micro-actions. Instead of requiring yourself to do the full, intimidating version of the task, you commit to a version so small it almost feels ridiculous. You open the document. You put on your workout clothes. You write one sentence. You make the first small move. The resistance is loudest before you start. Once you begin, once there is actual forward momentum, it quiets down significantly. The hardest moment is the one right before the first action. Your job is simply to get through that moment. Understanding internal resistance doesn't make it disappear, but it changes your relationship with it entirely. Instead of interpreting resistance as a sign that you're on the wrong path, you start recognizing it as a sign that you're on the right one. that you're approaching something genuinely significant, something that requires real growth. And you learn to take action in the presence of resistance, not after it subsides, not when you feel ready. Now, with the resistance there, because readiness is not a feeling that arrives before action. It is a quality that develops through it. Chapter 10. How the Top 1% Actually Think Differently. It's not intelligence, it's not talent, it's not even work ethic, though that matters. The deepest, most sustainable difference between people who create extraordinary lives and people who remain perpetually stuck in ordinary ones is not what they do. It's how they think. The mental models they use to make sense of their experience, navigate uncertainty, and make decisions that compound positively over time. Most people inherit their thinking frameworks the same way they inherit their beliefs, unconsciously, from their environment, without ever examining whether those frameworks actually serve them. They think in patterns absorbed from people who were themselves operating from unexamined assumptions. But thinking is a skill, and like any skill, it can be deliberately developed. The people operating at the highest levels of any field are not just working harder, they are thinking with better tools. Here are the thinking frameworks that, in my observation, make the most significant difference. The first is systems thinking versus event thinking. Most people think in events. Something happens. They react to it. Something else happens. They react to that. Life feels like a series of disconnected occurrences that they're perpetually responding to. Systems thinkers see something different. They see the patterns connecting events. They ask not just what happened, but why does this keep happening? They look for the feedback loops, the root causes, the leverage points where a small change could produce a large and lasting result. In personal development, systems thinking means understanding that your life is not a collection of separate problems to be solved one at a time. It is an interconnected whole where improving one area naturally cascades into improvements elsewhere. When you sleep better, you think more clearly. When you think more clearly, you make better decisions. When you make better decisions, you experience less stress. When you experience less stress, you sleep better. Systems thinkers find the leverage points, the changes that ripple outward through the entire system, and focus their energy there rather than scattering it across dozens of low-impact adjustments. The second framework is probabilistic thinking versus binary thinking. Binary thinkers see the world in absolutes. Things will either work or they won't. You'll succeed or you'll fail. It's a good idea or a bad one. Probabilistic thinkers understand that reality operates in likelihoods and gradients. No outcome is certain. No path is guaranteed. The goal isn't to find the option that can't fail. It's to consistently position yourself in situations where the odds of a good outcome are high, while managing your exposure to catastrophic downside. This matters enormously for how you approach risk. Binary thinkers either avoid risk entirely, because anything could fail, or take reckless risks because they've convinced themselves something can't go wrong. Probabilistic thinkers take intelligent risks. They ask, given what I know, what is the likelihood of various outcomes? What can I do to increase the probability of success? What is the actual cost of failure if this doesn't work? And how do I position myself to benefit from the upside while surviving the downside? This kind of thinking makes you more courageous because you're not pretending. there's no risk. You're understanding risk accurately, which makes it far less paralyzing. The third framework is inversion thinking, and this one is underused to a remarkable degree. While most people are focused on what they need to do to succeed, inversion thinkers spend significant time thinking about what they need to avoid in order not to fail. The question isn't just, what would take me toward my goal? It's also, what would guarantee I never reach it? When you answer that second question honestly and specifically, you get an extraordinarily clear picture of the behaviors, patterns, and decisions that are most likely to undermine your progress. And then you systematically eliminate them. This approach is powerful because it's often far easier to identify the clear causes of failure than to identify the precise formula for success. And removing failure patterns is frequently a faster path to results than adding new success behaviors. Applied to your own life, what would guarantee that I never develop genuine self-focus? What would ensure I remain stuck in people-pleasing and external validation? What daily choices would most reliably keep me living someone else's life instead of my own? Answer those questions honestly, then stop doing those things. The fourth framework is second-order thinking, thinking beyond immediate consequences to the consequences of consequences. Every choice you make creates a first-order effect, but it also creates second, third, and fourth-order effects that compound over time. Most people only evaluate the first order. They ask, what will happen immediately if I do this? And they make their choice based on that. Second-order thinkers ask, and then what? And after that? And what does this choice make more likely or less likely 6 months from now? The habit of checking your phone first thing in the morning feels harmless as a first-order effect. It's just a few minutes of catching up. But the second-order effect is that you've immediately put your brain into reactive mode, processing other people's agendas and inputs before you've even established your own intentions for the day. The third-order effect is that this reactive orientation compounds over weeks and months into a habitual way of relating to your own life, responding rather than creating. Second-order thinking changes what you optimize for. Instead of asking what feels good right now, you start asking what you'll be grateful for later. The fifth framework is anti-fragility thinking, a concept that deserves far more attention than it typically gets. Fragile things break under stress. Resilient things survive stress and return to their original state. But anti-fragile things do something even more remarkable. They actually improve because of stress. They get stronger from being challenged. They develop capabilities through adversity that they couldn't have developed any other way. When you build your life with anti-fragility as a guiding principle, you stop trying to eliminate all risk and uncertainty, because you recognize that's both impossible and counterproductive. Instead, you design your life so that challenges, setbacks, and unexpected disruptions don't just fail to break you, but actively make you stronger and more capable. This means developing skills in multiple domains so that a setback in one area doesn't devastate your entire system. It means building the kind of mental and emotional resilience that genuinely grows under pressure. It means approaching inevitable difficulties with the question, how does this make me stronger? Rather than how do I make this stop? The mental models you operate with are not fixed. They were acquired, and they can be upgraded. When you deliberately develop these thinking frameworks, you don't just make better decisions in isolated situations. You fundamentally change the quality of thinking you bring to everything. and that compounds in ways that are difficult to overstate. Chapter 11. Building the kind of momentum that carries you forward. Most people experience growth in a pattern that looks like this. They get inspired, they work hard, they make some progress, they plateau, they lose motivation, they stagnate, they get inspired again, and the cycle repeats. They're not going backward exactly, but they're not building either. They're spinning, working hard, covering ground, but somehow ending up close to where they started. What breaks this pattern is not more motivation or more discipline. Those help, but they're not the root answer. What breaks it is momentum, real, self-sustaining, compounding momentum that builds on itself rather than repeatedly starting from zero. Here's the difference. Motivation is a feeling. It comes and goes. It's high when something is new and exciting, and low when things get hard and repetitive. Relying on motivation is like relying on good weather. Sometimes it's there, and when it is, everything feels easier, but you cannot build a reliable life on something this variable. Momentum is a system. It doesn't depend on how you feel. It's built into the structure of how you operate. And once it reaches a certain threshold, it becomes self-sustaining, each advance making the next one easier rather than harder. Let me walk you through how to build it. The first element is progression stacking, arranging your goals and growth areas so that each achievement directly enables the next one. Most people treat their different goals as separate, competing demands on their time and energy. They want to get healthier and advance their career and improve their relationships and develop a new skill. And they feel perpetually torn because these goals seem to pull in different directions. Progression stacking reframes this entirely. Instead of treating these as competing objectives, you sequence them strategically so that success in one area builds the foundation for success in the next. Start with the goal whose achievement makes everything else easier. For most people, that's something physical, building the discipline, energy, and mental clarity that come from consistent exercise and sleep. These improvements cascade immediately into cognitive performance, emotional stability, and the kind of confident, grounded energy that makes every other goal more achievable. From that physical foundation, build the mental and emotional work. From that foundation, build the professional and relational work. Each layer rests on the one before it. Each success creates capacity for the next. The second element is capturing the momentum from wins, something most people do almost no attention to. When you achieve something meaningful, complete a hard project, break a personal record, have a breakthrough conversation, make a difficult decision and follow through, there is a window immediately following that win where your confidence, your energy, and your willingness to take the next risk are elevated. Most people close that window without using it. They feel good for a day and then move on. The momentum dissipates unused. The practice here is to use wins immediately as launching pads. Right after a success, while the confidence and energy are still elevated, identify and take the first step toward the next meaningful challenge. You're not riding the emotion for the sake of it. You're using the psychological state created by success to initiate the action that will create the next success. Over time, this creates a chain, each win generating the momentum for the next one, the compound interest of success. The third element is how you process setbacks, because setbacks are inevitable, and the speed with which you recover from them determines more about your long-term trajectory than almost anything else. Most people treat setbacks as stops. The progress halts, there's a period of recovery, and then eventually they try to restart from a lower position than before. High momentum people treat setbacks differently. They treat them as information, compressed, specific, actionable data about what needs to change. They move through the emotional response quickly, not by suppressing it, but by not amplifying it. And they ask immediately, what does this teach me, and how do I use that teaching in my very next attempt? The gap between a setback and your next action is where momentum either lives or dies. Keep that gap as small as possible. The fourth element is environmental design for momentum, structuring your physical, social, and informational surroundings to make positive behaviors automatic and momentum-killing behaviors difficult. Willpower is exhausted by decision-making. Every time you have to consciously decide to do the right thing, to exercise, to work on your growth, to stay focused, you're drawing from a limited reserve. Environmental design removes these decisions by making the positive behavior the path of least resistance. Your home, your workspace, your daily routine, the people you spend the most time with, the content you consume, all of these are either building your momentum or draining it. They are never neutral. Design them deliberately. Set up your environment so that the behaviors you want to repeat are easy, obvious, and automatic. And the behaviors you want to eliminate are inconvenient, distant, and difficult to access. When your environment supports your goals, you stop needing to fight yourself every day to stay on track. The structure of your life does the work that willpower was never designed to do. The fifth element is the compound effect of small daily actions. This is perhaps the most underappreciated truth in all of personal development, and it deserves to be stated plainly. You will not transform your life through grand gestures and dramatic overhauls. You will transform it through what you do consistently on an ordinary Tuesday, through the small choices you make when no one is watching and nothing feels particularly significant. The person who reads 10 pages every day doesn't feel like they're doing anything remarkable in the moment, but across a year, they've read 30-plus books. Across 5 years, they've inhabited hundreds of different minds and perspectives. That compounds into a quality of thinking and understanding that cannot be acquired any other way. The person who moves their body every day doesn't feel heroic during their workout, but across years, they've built a physical and mental foundation that makes everything else in their life easier, more sustainable, and more resilient. Small actions, compounded over time, create results that look miraculous from the outside, but are actually just the inevitable mathematics of consistency. The question isn't whether you'll see results. You will if you're consistent. The question is whether you'll stay consistent long enough for the compound effect to become undeniable. Build your momentum deliberately, protect it fiercely, and trust the mathematics. Chapter 12. Designing the Life That Runs Itself. Here's something worth sitting with for a moment. Right now, your life is running on a program you didn't write. The way you respond when someone criticizes you, the automatic guilt you feel when you prioritize yourself, the habitual way you start your mornings, the patterns you fall into under stress, the default version of yourself that shows up when you're tired, overwhelmed, or caught off guard. None of that was consciously designed. It was absorbed from your family, your early experiences, your culture, the environment you grew up in. It was installed piece by piece through thousands of repetitions, most of them happening before you were old enough to evaluate whether the programming actually served you. And here's the uncomfortable reality. That unexamined program is currently making most of your decisions for you. Not the version of you that reads books and sets intentions and genuinely wants to grow. The version of you that was shaped before you had any say in the shaping. The automatic, default, reactive version, and it is running far more of your life than your conscious mind would like to believe. The work of this chapter is learning how to become the programmer instead of just the program. How to consciously design the operating system of your own life, the default settings, the decision-making frameworks, the stress responses, the growth mechanisms, so that your life moves toward what you actually want automatically, rather than toward whatever your unexamined conditioning directs it toward. Your default settings are the unconscious behaviors that make up the bulk of your daily experience. Research suggests that somewhere between 40 and 60% of your daily actions are habitual, performed without conscious deliberation, simply because that's what you've done before in similar circumstances. This is not a problem to be solved. Automaticity is an incredibly powerful feature of human cognition. The question is simply, are your automatic behaviors serving you, or are they running you in a direction you haven't consciously chosen? Designing your default settings means identifying the handful of daily behaviors that have the highest leverage on everything else. The ones that, when done consistently, create the conditions for everything else to go better. And installing those behaviors so deeply through repetition that they become automatic. Your morning is the most important default setting of all, not because of the specific activities, the journals and workouts and cold showers that productivity culture promotes, but because of the principle. The first hour of your day either belongs to you or to the world. It either sets your own intentions, centers your own focus, and establishes your own priorities. Or it immediately pulls you into reactivity, into other people's agendas, into whatever is loudest in your notifications. When your morning belongs to you, consistently, automatically, without negotiation, everything else in your day is built on a different foundation. You're not catching up to the world. You're meeting it from a position you chose. Your decision-making protocols are the frameworks you use when options are in front of you. Most people make decisions the same way, reactively, based on how they feel in the moment, what seems safest, or what will generate the most immediate approval. This produces inconsistency, because feelings are inconsistent, and it produces misalignment, because the path of least resistance rarely leads where you actually want to go. A designed decision-making protocol means having predetermined criteria that you apply consistently. Before a significant choice, you ask, does this align with what I said matters most to me? Does the long-term consequence of this serve the person I'm becoming, or just the comfort of this moment? Am I choosing this because I genuinely want to, or because I'm afraid of what happens if I don't? These questions take seconds to run through once they're habitual, and they transform the cumulative quality of your decisions over time in ways that are difficult to fully quantify, but impossible to miss. Your stress response programs determine who you become under pressure, which is ultimately where character is actually built. Most people's automatic response to stress is one of three things: fight, where they become reactive and aggressive; flight, where they withdraw and avoid; or freeze, where they become paralyzed and indecisive. These responses were wired in early, often before conscious memory, and they activate automatically when pressure rises above a certain threshold. Designing a new stress response doesn't mean eliminating these instincts. It means building a conscious layer that activates before the automatic response takes full control. A pause, a breath, a practiced question: what does this situation actually require of me? That pause, that single conscious moment between stimulus and response, is where your designed self lives. And with enough practice, the pause becomes the default. The designed response becomes the automatic one. You literally rewire what happens in you when things get hard. Your growth and adaptation routines are the systems that ensure your operating system continuously improves rather than stagnating. This means building regular review into your life, not as an occasional reflection when things go wrong, but as a consistent, scheduled practice that runs regardless of how things are going. Weekly: what worked, what didn't, what do I want to do differently? Monthly: am I still aligned with what I said matters most? Quarterly: is this the life I'm consciously choosing, or the one I drifted into? These reviews are not navel-gazing. They are quality control for the most important project you will ever run, yourself. And when they're built into your system consistently, they ensure that you're always moving toward your own intentionally chosen direction rather than wherever the current is carrying you. The goal of all of this is not to make your life mechanical or rigid. It's the opposite. When the fundamentals run automatically, when your health, your focus, your mourning, your decision-making are handled by strong defaults, you have far more mental and emotional energy available for the things that require creativity, spontaneity, and genuine presence. You are not designing a prison. You are building a foundation stable enough to support genuine freedom. Chapter 13, The Way You Think is the Life You Live. Every external result in your life is a downstream consequence of an upstream thought. The relationship you're in, the career you're building, the body you inhabit, the way you feel when you wake up in the morning, all of it traces back ultimately to the quality of thinking that has been directing your choices, consciously and unconsciously, over time. This is not mysticism. It's straightforward causality. Thoughts inform beliefs. Beliefs shape expectations. Expectations drive behavior. Behavior creates results. Results become the circumstances of your life. If you want different circumstances, and you do, or you wouldn't be here, you need different thinking. Not just different thoughts, but a fundamentally upgraded quality of thinking. Better frameworks, more sophisticated mental tools, the capacity to see what others miss and anticipate what others ignore. We touched on several of these frameworks in the previous chapter. I want to go deeper on a few that are particularly transformative when applied specifically to the project of building a life focused on your own growth. The first is the distinction between playing not to lose and playing to win. These sound like the same thing. They are not. Playing not to lose means your primary motivation is avoiding negative outcomes, avoiding failure, avoiding judgment, avoiding loss, avoiding pain. People in this mode make decisions based primarily on what feels safest. They take the conventional path. They stay within the known. They optimize for not being wrong rather than for being right in ways that matter. Playing to win means your primary motivation is achieving positive outcomes, pursuing what genuinely excites you, building what you actually care about, becoming who you are genuinely capable of becoming. People in this mode make decisions based primarily on what offers the best possible upside, with an honest and managed awareness of the downside. The key insight is that these modes produce completely different behaviors in identical situations. The same opportunity that a not-to-lose thinker dismisses as too risky, a play-to-win thinker sees as worth pursuing with appropriate caution. The same criticism that devastates a not-to-lose thinker becomes useful data for a play-to-win thinker. You cannot build an extraordinary life from a not-to-lose orientation. The ceiling is too low. The decisions are too conservative. The energy is too defensive. You will be safe and profoundly unfulfilled. Ask yourself honestly, in the areas that matter most to you right now, are you playing to win or playing not to lose? The second is long game thinking, the consistent, disciplined practice of making decisions based on who you want to be in 5, 10, 20 years, rather than who you want to feel like in the next 5 minutes. This sounds obvious. Almost everyone, when asked, would say they care about the long term. But watch the actual behavior, and a different picture emerges. Most decisions, when you look at them honestly, are optimized for the immediate, for comfort right now, for relief right now, for approval right now. Long game thinking requires a specific kind of willingness, the willingness to be uncomfortable in the present in exchange for something significantly better in the future. To say no to what feels good now in order to say yes to what will matter later. The compound effect we discussed in the last chapter only works if you're playing the long game. The investment only pays off if you leave it in long enough. And most people pull their investments in their health, their growth, their skills, their relationships, long before the compound effect has a chance to become dramatic. The third is what I call honest self-witnessing, the ability to observe yourself clearly without the distortions of ego on one side or self-criticism on the other. Most people have a significant blind spot when it comes to their own patterns. They're either overly defended, unable to see the ways their own behavior is creating the outcomes they're complaining about, or overly self-critical, amplifying every flaw and shortcoming into evidence of fundamental inadequacy. Neither of these is accurate. Neither of these is useful. Honest self-witnessing is the practice of seeing yourself as you actually are, your genuine strengths and your real limitations, your actual progress and your current gaps. With the same clear, compassionate objectivity you might bring to someone you deeply care about and genuinely want to see succeed. This is the mental posture that makes growth possible, not the defensive one that protects your ego from uncomfortable truths, not the critical one that collapses into shame at every imperfection. The clear, honest, compassionate one that says, here is where I actually am. Here is where I genuinely want to go, and here is what the gap between those two things is telling me I need to work on. That posture, honest, clear, self-compassionate, growth-oriented, is the foundation of every mental upgrade that follows. You cannot improve what you cannot see clearly, and you cannot see clearly when you're either defending yourself from the truth or attacking yourself with it. Develop the capacity for honest self-witnessing. It will serve you in every area of everything you're building. Chapter 14. Discipline is not what you think it is. Most people have discipline wrong. They think it's about forcing themselves to do hard things, about white-knuckling through resistance, about being tough enough, strong-willed enough, serious enough to make yourself do what needs to be done even when every part of you is screaming to stop. That version of discipline is real, but it's the beginner version. It's the version that works for a few weeks and then burns out spectacularly. It's the version that produces the January gym surge and the February return to the couch. It's the version that most people try, fail with, and then use as evidence that they're simply not a disciplined person. Real discipline, the kind that actually compounds over years into something extraordinary, is built on a completely different foundation. And once you understand that foundation, everything about how you approach your own consistency changes. The foundation is identity, not effort. Here is the central shift. Stop asking, what do I need to force myself to do? And start asking, who do I need to become? When you try to build discipline through effort, you are always fighting against your own self-concept. Some part of you believes you are not a disciplined person. And so every disciplined action requires you to overcome that belief through sheer force of will. This is exhausting and unsustainable. When you build discipline through identity, the dynamic reverses. You are not overcoming yourself. You are expressing yourself. You're not fighting against who you are. You're becoming who you are. You don't drag yourself to exercise because you need the calories burned. You move your body because you are someone who respects and maintains their physical health. And that's just what people like that do. You don't force yourself to do focused, meaningful work every day. You show up and do it because you are someone who creates value and takes their growth seriously. And that's simply part of who you are. The behavior is the same, but the internal experience is completely different. One feels like resistance overcome. The other feels like alignment expressed. The practical path to identity-based discipline is evidence accumulation. Every time you act in alignment with the identity you're building, every single time, you cast a vote for that identity in your subconscious. The evidence stacks up, the self-concept shifts, and gradually the behaviors that once required enormous effort become automatic, because they're now simply expressions of who you are rather than battles against who you are. Start small, embarrassingly small if necessary. The size of the action matters far less than the consistency of it. One page written every day builds a writer's identity faster than 1,000 pages written in a frantic burst and then nothing for months. The consistency is the message to yourself about yourself. The second pillar of real discipline is environmental architecture, which we've touched on before, but which deserves specific attention here. You cannot rely on motivation and willpower to sustain long-term disciplined behavior. Both are finite, both fluctuate, both are heavily influenced by circumstances you don't control. Relying on them is like planning to run a marathon on whatever energy you happen to have that day. Sometimes it would work out, but the variance would be enormous. Environmental architecture removes the reliance on variable internal resources by building the support for disciplined behavior directly into your surroundings. Make the disciplined choice the easy choice. Make the undisciplined choice the difficult one. Remove friction from the behaviors you want to repeat and add friction to the behaviors you want to eliminate. If you want to read more, Keep books in the places where you spend time. And remove your phone from those same places. If you want to exercise consistently, prepare everything the night before so that starting is the path of least resistance when morning comes. If you want to eat better, restructure what's immediately available in your home so that the nourishing option is what you reach for automatically. None of this requires exceptional willpower. It requires thoughtful design. And thoughtful design, applied consistently to your environment, makes disciplined behavior far more sustainable than any amount of motivational effort. The third pillar is recovery, and this may be the most underestimated component of sustainable discipline. Everyone who maintains long-term consistent discipline breaks it sometimes. This is not failure. This is human. The question is not whether you'll have lapses. You will, but what you do immediately after them. Most people, when they break a streak or miss a commitment, respond in one of two destructive ways. They catastrophize, treating the lapse as definitive evidence of their fundamental inability to be disciplined, which triggers a shame spiral that makes the next attempt even harder. Or they compensate, trying to make up for the missed action through excessive effort, which creates burnout and eventually another larger lapse. The disciplined response to a lapse is neither of these. It is simply begin again, now, without drama, not tomorrow, not after a proper restart ritual, now. The next right action, taken immediately, without the weight of self-judgment. This is how you stay in the game long enough for the compound effect to work. Your discipline is not measured by your perfect days. It is measured by how quickly you return after the imperfect ones. The fourth pillar is sustainable intensity, which means being honest about the level of consistent effort you can actually maintain over years, rather than the maximum level you can sustain for weeks. Extreme measures produce extreme results in the short term and extreme burnout in the medium term. The goal is not to find the most intense version of discipline you can force yourself through. The goal is to find the most effective version you can sustain indefinitely, and then gradually, patiently, expand that level as your capacity grows. Progressive overload, the principle that underlies all physical training, applies equally to the discipline of building your life. You challenge yourself at a level slightly beyond your current comfort zone. You adapt. You grow. You raise the challenge slightly again. Repeat indefinitely. This produces growth that looks slow from the inside but appears remarkable from the outside because it never stops. The person who grows consistently at 10% per year without burning out and resetting will far outpace the person who grows explosively for 6 months and then collapses back to baseline. Discipline is not a temporary intensity. It is a permanent orientation. And the foundation of that permanent orientation is not willpower. It is identity, environment, recovery, and sustainable intensity working together as a system. Build that system, then trust it, then watch what it builds. Chapter 15, The Life That Lasts. Everything we've talked about in this conversation has been building toward one thing, not a goal achieved, not a peak reached, not a transformation completed and wrapped up. Something more durable than any of those things, a life architecture, a deliberately designed structure for how you live that ensures the person you're becoming now doesn't slowly drift back into the person you're leaving behind. Because here's the honest truth about personal growth that doesn't get said enough. Transformation without architecture doesn't last. You can have the most profound realization, the most genuine breakthrough, the most powerful shift in perspective. And if you don't build structures that support and sustain, the new version of you, the old patterns, will gradually reclaim the territory. Not because you're weak, because you're human, because old neural pathways are persistent, because your environment will default to what it's always been if you don't redesign it, because the people around you will continue to relate to the old version of you unless you actively, consistently demonstrate the new one. Lasting transformation requires architecture. And here is what that architecture looks like. The first element is structural integrity. Building your life on foundations that hold under pressure, not just under ideal conditions. Most transformations are built on enthusiasm. Enthusiasm is real, but it is temporary. The excitement of beginning fades. The novelty wears off. The resistance increases as you go deeper. And if your transformation was built on the enthusiasm of starting, it will not survive the ordinary difficulty of continuing. Structural integrity means building your new life on systems, environments, and habits. Things that function regardless of how you feel on a given day. Your morning practice doesn't happen because you feel motivated. It happens because it's built into your structure, and skipping it would require deliberate effort. Your growth investments don't happen when the mood strikes. They happen because they're non-negotiable appointments with yourself, treated with the same seriousness as any external commitment. When your structure is solid, the bad days don't derail you. They're just days where you lean on the structure instead of your enthusiasm, and the structure holds. The second element is continuous evolution. Understanding that the goal is not to arrive at a final fixed version of yourself, but to become someone who perpetually grows. This is a mindset shift that changes everything. Most people approach personal development as if there's a destination, a version of themselves that will feel complete, finished, fully realized. They imagine that when they finally achieve enough, become enough, fix enough of what's wrong, they'll be done. But there is no done. There is only the ongoing, endlessly fascinating, sometimes frustrating, always meaningful process of becoming more than you currently are. When you embrace this, when you stop chasing completion and start embracing evolution, your relationship with growth changes entirely. Challenges stop being obstacles to your arrival at some destination and become the actual substance of a life well lived. Growth stops being a means to an end and becomes an end in itself. The most alive, most fulfilled, most genuinely happy people are not those who have arrived. They are those who are genuinely, wholeheartedly, and perpetually in the process of becoming. The third element is purpose beyond yourself, because growth that serves only you will eventually run out of fuel. When your transformation is entirely personal, when it's only about your own achievement, your own satisfaction, your own progress, it is sustained only by your personal ambition. And personal ambition, however powerful, is finite. It gets tired. It gets satisfied. It loses urgency when the immediate pressure is gone. But when your growth serves something larger, when becoming the best version of yourself is connected to how you show up for other people, to the contribution you're able to make, to the example you're setting for someone watching, the fuel becomes almost inexhaustible. This doesn't require grand ambitions or a world-changing mission. It can be as immediate and personal as, I want to become someone my children will learn from. I want to be the kind of friend who actually helps people grow. I want to contribute work that genuinely matters to the people it reaches. When your own growth is connected to something outside of you, maintaining it stops being self-discipline and starts being responsibility. And responsibility has staying power that self-discipline often doesn't. The fourth element is your relational environment, the people who surround you as you build and maintain this new version of yourself. I cannot overstate how much this matters. You are, in very concrete and measurable ways, the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Not because of some mystical law of attraction, but because of the entirely mundane reality that the people closest to you shape your norms, your expectations, your standards, your sense of what's possible and what's acceptable. If the people surrounding you are comfortable with mediocrity, if they celebrate staying safe, validate self-limitation, and treat ambition as something slightly embarrassing, staying in their orbit requires you to constantly swim against a current that is working against everything you're building. This doesn't mean abandoning everyone who isn't growing at the pace you want to grow. It means being intentional about adding relationships that support and challenge your growth, not just maintaining the ones you've inherited by circumstance. Seek out people who are further along the path you're walking, people who expect more from themselves, and therefore, through their presence, expect more from you. People whose standard of what's normal is higher than your current standard. Because normal is contagious in both directions. And wherever possible, become that person for someone else. Mentor someone who is where you were. Contribute what you've learned to the growth of others. Because nothing consolidates a transformation more powerfully than living it out loud for someone who needs to see that it's possible. The truth you need to carry with you. We have covered a tremendous amount of ground together. We've talked about why you abandoned yourself and what that abandonment costs you. We've talked about what's happening in your brain when you neglect your own growth and what becomes possible when you stop. We've talked about the approval trap, the people-pleasing prison, the internal resistance that shows up every time you try to change. We've talked about how to build genuine self-worth from the inside out, how to protect your energy, how to rebuild your body and mind as the integrated system they actually are. We've talked about the thinking frameworks that separate ordinary lives from extraordinary ones, the momentum systems that turn growth from a struggle into a natural forward movement. We've talked about discipline, about the operating system of your life, about what it takes to make transformation last. But I want to leave you with something simpler than all of that. Something you can hold on to on the days when nothing feels clear and everything feels hard. You matter, not what you produce, not how useful you are, not how well you manage to keep everyone around you happy and comfortable. You, your growth, your inner life, your authentic development, your becoming. You have been living as if the least important person in your own life is you, as if everyone else's needs, opinions, and comfort should take priority over your own growth, your own truth, your own becoming. That belief has cost you more than you know, and it is not true. The most generous thing you can do for every person you love, every cause you care about, every contribution you want to make, is to become as fully, as deeply, as completely yourself as you are capable of becoming. To give your own growth the attention and investment it deserves, to treat yourself as the most important project you will ever take on. Because you are. This is not arrogance. This is not selfishness. This is the simple, foundational truth that makes everything else possible. You cannot give what you do not have. You cannot sustain what you have not built. You cannot become who you are meant to be if you keep giving all of yourself away before you fully become it. Start today, not Monday, not after things settle down, not when you have more time or more energy or more certainty. Today, spend 5 minutes this morning before anything else, before the phone, before the news, before the first demand of the day. In the quiet company of yourself, ask who you're choosing to be today. Ask what matters most to you right now. Ask what one thing you will do today that is purely for your own growth. Then do that thing, and then tomorrow, do it again, and the day after that. This is how the rebuilt life begins, not with a dramatic overhaul, not with a perfect plan, but with the simple, radical daily decision to make yourself a priority, to let your focus be on you every single day until that focus becomes who you are and the life it builds becomes undeniably, beautifully yours. The work begins now.